Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Echo Live, coming to you from the Michigan Science Center's Echo Distance Learning Studio. My name is Anna, and I promised you last week that we had one more pretty amazing experiment to show off here on our program that is in celebration of Chemistry Month. So if you missed last week's episode, I definitely recommended it. We're talking all about chemistry because it is Chemistry Month during the month of October. Now, last week, we did an experiment using a gas called oxygen. Oxygen is a very important gas to us human beings, right? We know we need to breathe it in order to fuel our body for all those various metabolic processes. However, the word fuel may have been a little bit misleading because last week we proved that oxygen on its own is not actually combustible. So we had a couple experiments that we did. We talked about how oxygen is important for combustion reactions, even though it's not necessarily a fuel on its own. But today I brought with me a different material, a different gas. And I've actually trapped that gas here inside this balloon. Now, if you're tuning in live, you can go ahead and you can make a guess in the chat about what gas do you think is inside this pink balloon. Now, I'll continue to give you a couple hints. If we take a look at my balloon here, you'll notice that it's actually floating. So it must be a pretty light gas. If you're familiar with the periodic table of elements, you can guess any one of those elements from our periodic table, and that could be what is inside our balloon. Now, my oxygen balloon last week, it did not float like this. Thankfully, this balloon isn't floating away because the hose that it's attached to is pretty heavy. But this gas inside this balloon is actually lighter than the air. Oxygen was not, which is why our oxygen balloon last week sat pretty low to the table. And so this balloon is a very, very light gas. It's one that we should be pretty familiar with. It's a pretty important element on our periodic table. Now, I know people might be thinking helium, right? We see floating helium balloons all the time at possibly parties, or maybe you get one at the dentist office. But this gas is actually not helium. It's even lighter. This is element number 1 from our periodic table. This is hydrogen, pure hydrogen gas inside this balloon. It is the smallest element on our periodic table, therefore the lightest, which is why it floats inside our balloon here. Now, last week we talked about oxygen, and that oxygen is an accelerant, meaning that it's useful and required for combustion reactions, but not flammable on its own. But hydrogen is a completely different story. So the gas inside this balloon is highly flammable, but instead of lighting the balloon like we did last week, I'm actually going to hold this explosion right in the palm of my hand. Now, that sounds a little bit dangerous, and in fact it is. So since we're talking about Chemistry Month and an explosion, which we are going to show you, definitely some time to put on my safety equipment. So I've got on my safety goggles to protect my eyes. I'm already wearing my lab coat, but I've got my fire extinguisher right off to the side here. And so I am prepared with everything I need in order to perform this experiment safely. And I've also been trained to know how to do this safely without anyone getting hurt. Now, this is another do not try this at home experiment, and do not try in the classroom. Not that it's very easy to come by hydrogen gas like I have here. You have to get it from a very special place, which is not easy to come by. But I do have it here. And like we said, we are safe and we are trained. And so this is a do not try at home or in the classroom. Watch it here on Echo Live or visit us at the Science Center, and maybe you'll get to see it on a pretty special occasion. But if I want to hold this explosion in the palm of my hand, rather than just holding onto the balloon, I thought instead I would trap this gas inside some soap bubbles. So I've got some soap sitting inside this water here. So I just have a soap solution, meaning soap and water mixed together. And that is going to allow me to trap this hydrogen gas inside some of these bubbles here. So we'll use a little bit of our hydrogen for now. But what I also need to do is, in order to keep my arms safe, since we are going to be lighting these bubbles on fire, is just go ahead and get my arms nice and covered in this soap solution. So the water is actually going to help to insulate my hands. It's going to help to protect me from the heat that's created by this reaction. And so I'm going to be very, very safe. Now, I'm only going to hold the bubbles in my left hand here. So I'm going to go ahead and dry off my right hand, and then I'm just going to scoop up those bubbles of pure hydrogen gas. Now, watch closely as we bring our lighter close to those bubbles. 3, 2, 1. And look at that. An explosion, definitely. Maybe not the loudest one. If I were to pop this balloon, it would be pretty loud here in my studio. But I saved enough gas that we can definitely do that one again. So we're just going to go ahead and take the rest of my gas here from my balloon and just make as many bubbles as we possibly can. Now, like we said, definitely don't try at home, but only certain elements on the periodic table are combustible. Now, if you're interested in learning about hydrogen specifically, we actually did an episode of Echo Live last year that was all about nuclear science and about how hydrogen and helium are actually very, very heavily involved in nuclear science and in nuclear reactions. So I'll be posting a link to that episode in the chat, no matter which platform you're watching on, and you can actually take a look at that episode if you're interested in learning more. Now I've got a ton of bubbles here, so I actually have a little bit left over. Maybe we'll get to do this reaction for a third time, which is pretty special. But going ahead, just wetting my hand back down one more time here, getting lots of that nice cold soapy water all over, drying off only my right hand so I can use my lighter, scooping up a big pile of those bubbles, watching some of them float away. And here we go in 3, 2, 1. Kapow! Now, I do have some leftover hydrogen bubbles here on my container, and we did promise that we had a little bit left over. So instead of holding them in my hands, let's see if we can make one big pile of bubbles and ignite them right here inside the tray. Now, if you've got questions, let me know in the chat. I'd be happy to answer them for you. One of my favorite things to do here on Echo Live is definitely things that you all don't get to do at home or in your classroom. So I'd be happy to answer your questions, happy to take suggestions for experiments that you'd like to see us do on future episodes of the show. But I'll give you all a nice close look at our final hydrogen reaction of the day. We're going to go ahead and ignite all of those leftover bubbles in 3, 2, 1. And would you look at that? Now that just about brings us to the end of our program here today. Thank you all so much for joining for yet another fun episode. I know I love doing experiments like this with you all live whenever I possibly can. And we stream episodes of Echo Live every Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. This is all thanks to Denso and the Michigan Space Grant Consortium for continuing to sponsor Echo Live through the end of this year. So stay tuned. We've got lots more fun and exciting experiments planned. So see you all next week. And like we said, let us know in the chat what you'd like to see us talk about next time. Have a great week.